Welcome to today's webinar. We've titled it The Absolutely Vital Practice of Managers Giving Positive Feedback. You know, Joe and I have, this is Jack Zenger speaking, and my colleague Joe Folkman will join me in this webinar today. We've talked from time to time about some of the big questions in life, one of which is what's the right thing to eat? And there's no general agreement on what the right thing to eat is for most of us. The other kind of interesting question that doesn't seem to go away is, people want and deserve feedback, but what kind of feedback is best? There are lots of opinions. Maybe some of it has to do with how you were raised. But what we'd like to do today is to present to you some, not just our opinions, but some data that we've collected on this subject with a fairly large database. Joe, is it 7,000?
Yeah, it's over 7,000. Jack, you know, to context this, I remember when I was in college, I'm a psych major, and there's a class on experimental psychology, and signed up for that, and then they told me there's a lab, and I thought, what's that? And the lab was rat training. And I don't know why they had us do it, you know, but you got a grade based on if you could get your rat to press a knob, you know, a certain number of times. What was fascinating was that with only positive reinforcement, we were able to get a rat to go over to a bar and press it 25 times for a drink of water. With only positive reinforcement. And after that, you could train them to do more things with just positive reinforcement. The interesting thing was that there was also kind of experiments with negative reinforcement where they'd electrify part of the grid, you know, that they were standing on. And basically what you got the rat to do was stand in the corner and shiver.
Right, completely immobilized.
That was a powerful lesson. To do that, and I want to sort of reflect back on that as we go through this data today.
We want to begin by asking you to participate with us in just three, we hope, interesting questions. The first one that you see up on the screen basically says, an effective manager has the responsibility to provide their direct reports with corrective feedback when team members make mistakes. How many of you would agree with that? If you do, press A. And how many would disagree with that? If so, press the B alternative.
It is their responsibility or not.
Right. Well, and what we're seeing is that it looks like it's a large swing toward the agree.
It's a landslide.
Looks like your data here from our group on this webinar today is around 92%, maybe 7% on the disagree side. Our data would show 95 and 3, so it's very close.
That's really true that people feel that responsibility. But interesting, I think they feel it even beyond their position, right? When you see stuff going wrong, people have a strong sense of responsibility. I need to correct that.
I need to fix that. That's right. Okay, the second question we have for you is having to do with positive feedback. The question reads, an effective manager has the responsibility to provide their direct reports with positive feedback when team members perform well. If you agree, press A. If you disagree, B. And here it's looking like not quite as much of a landslide, but maybe 80% say yes, you agree with positive feedback. 20% not so sure. They would say disagree. Okay, we have one more question that we'd like to have you respond to, and that is this. What helps? So now we've talked about which we think you're responsible for, but what do you believe helps the most? And the question reads, the thing that would help most employees to improve their performance is A, being given specific constructive suggestions about how to improve, or B, being given regular recognition and praise. What would your answer be to that question?
So praise or specific constructive. Okay.
And by constructive, we mean that these are corrective. These are kind of giving you direction to do it differently or to start something that you're not doing.
Around improvement.
It looks like maybe 80% again would say the A response, being given these specific suggestions for improvement. B would be positive reinforcement, recognition, praise.
And we have, Jack, on that, actually collected data on that specific question from 7,500 respondents. And our numbers on that are 82% and 18%. 82% saying that the thing that helps the most is given specific constructive suggestions about how to improve.
Yeah, so what we've seen playing out here, I think, are a couple of strong beliefs that exist. One is that it seems like the vast majority of leaders feel it's their duty and responsibility to provide corrective feedback when their team members make some mistake or they fail to do something. And secondly, they have this very strong belief that it will do the most good, that it has the greatest impact on their subordinates' future performance. And this seems to be driven in part by a sense of duty, that real leaders do this kind of thing, and that not so good leaders only rely on or overly rely on positive or reinforcing feedback.
So to reinforce that a bit and to make this sort of a no-brainer, what we found is that when we ask the question, negative redirecting feedback, if delivered appropriately, is effective at improving performance. 93% of our respondents, and this is 7,650 people, a global sample there, agree with that statement. I think that's pretty standard. That evidence is very strong to say people believe negative feedback helps, and it's the best way to help people improve their performance. That's kind of what we're finding in the data. And the problem is it's a little bit like Abraham Maslow said. He said if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you believe that the way to make things better, the way to fix people, the way to correct your kids, the way to make people perform is give them the feedback. Let them know what's going on. Be clear. You're going to do it. You're going to do it a lot.
Now we have one more question to ask you, and that question is on the poll right on the screen right now, and that is, so which of these two, giving positive feedback, reinforcing kudos, approbation, or giving negative or corrective, kind of redirecting kind of feedback, which of those two is the easier one for managers to deliver? So if you believe it's A, mark that one, please. If you think it's B, please choose that one. And let's kind of see what the data would show. Thanks for being so prompt about jumping in and answering. And it looks like, again, we see about a roughly 80-20 split. That 80% think it's easier to give positive feedback, whereas 20% think it's easier to give negative feedback. Both Joe and I have kind of thought about this question about why would negative feedback be easier? And I guess one theory would be that often the cause of negative feedback has some triggering event. Something's happened that really reminds you or kind of prompts you to do it. Whereas often on the positive side, it requires you kind of sitting back and thinking and being more kind of refined evaluation of this person's performance. And so people just don't maybe get around to do it.
Well, and that's an interesting thing because, again, what we found is this belief that negative feedback is going to help more, but positive feedback is easier to give. So why wouldn't you do it more often, right? And maybe being easy is the wrong question because easy doesn't necessarily mean helpful. Well, we have some data here. We had an assessment where we gave people 10 pairs of items, and the 10 pairs of items looked at giving people an alternative towards a preference towards giving or an avoidance. For instance, on negative feedback, we would ask a question like, if you saw an unfamiliar employee at your work doing something wrong, would you give them corrective feedback or would you choose not to embarrass them or say anything? Turns out that 78% of the people said I'd give them corrective feedback. Even though they're not on my team, I'd tell them they were doing it wrong, right? And 22% said they wouldn't. And then delivering corrective feedback, I'm usually relaxed or nervous. That was almost even. 54% said they were relaxed, and 46% said they were nervous. Those are the paired comparisons. Now, we had those set up. We had 10 questions for positive feedback and 10 questions for negative feedback. And out of that, we got a tendency to avoid or a tendency to give, right? So giving positive, giving negative. And what we found is that 63% of our sample, and this is a large sample, this is about 7,800 people, 63% had a strong preference to give negative feedback. Only 44% had a strong preference to give positive feedback. I mean, it's so dang easy, but people don't want to do it. But if you look at avoiding, and this is a crazy thing, 37% said they'd avoid giving positive feedback. Now, if it's easy, and why would you avoid it? My guess is that the belief is it doesn't help. I think. I don't know.
Well, the belief is certainly strongly that it's their duty, and that real leaders do this kind of thing.
The negative is their duty.
The negative, right. And I guess it's also the belief that positive feedback can be perceived as being talking down to somebody else, blowing smoke at them. It's not sincere. It lacks being credible. And so I think there's many reasons why people kind of avoid the positive feedback.
Well, hang on, because we're going to give you some interesting data. So the first piece of data were from those that answered these questions that we've just shown you. And what we did is we divided people, if you think about the avoid versus the gives, and then the positive versus the negative. So we end up with four groups. And the first group is an avoid, and then an avoid gives, and an avoids gives, giving positive, and then gives negative, and then you can see the graph there yourself. What we're measuring here is this question. I would rate myself as highly effective at providing others with honest, straightforward feedback. So if you avoided, you only had 30.6% that strongly agreed with that statement. But if you avoided giving positive but gave negative, 72%. If you give positive but avoid giving negative, that goes down to about 40%. But if you give both positive and negative, it was 78%. So it's clear that people that feel like they're giving negative feedback or positive positive and negative feedback, they believe they're much better at being helpful to others and giving positive feedback. Now, this is great, but we often find self-perceptions are wrong. And in this case, what we believe people think is that the belief is leaders who give tough feedback think they're better at developing others.
So now if you ask the people who are on the receiving end, you get some more interesting information.
So let's look at that. We were able to match up data from 328 managers where we had 360 data. And surprise, surprise, we asked the question. This person gives honest, straightforward feedback. And what we're looking at is the responses from managers, peers, direct reports, and others. What you see here is their effectiveness is rated in a percentile. So a high number here, 100th percentile would be amazing. First percentile would be very poor. 50th percentile would be about average or a little bit, right in there. So what you see here is, remember in the first graph, we said that those that avoided giving positive but gave negative thought they were very effective at giving feedback. Well, others rate them at the 36th percentile. Actually, the avoid group was better. But if you looked at those that gave positive feedback but avoid giving negative, they're at the 53rd percentile, and people that gave both were about the 52nd percentile. Gosh, Jack, when I first saw this data, I was kind of blown away.
Yeah.
I mean, what this is saying to us, and this is how other people react to your preference for sort of, if you have a strong preference around, I got to correct people, I got to tell them what's wrong, I got to do that. It actually hurts your effectiveness. And people would rate you very low. 36th percentile is pretty bad.
Right. Well, and it's really instructive to look at these four bars and to see that the two that are significantly higher are the ones that involve giving positive feedback.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is you notice that if you give positive, then give negative.
That's okay.
It's okay. So what we said is, okay, let's broaden this out a bit. We looked at a specific item around giving positive feedback or giving honest feedback in a helpful way. The second chart shows you the percentage of people who were rated on developing others, a broader category. It talked about coaching and feedback and all three of those things. And what you see is approximately the same trend. What you see is, again, the lowest bar is the person that avoids giving positive, gives negative, 37th percentile. But those that give positive and avoid giving negative, 55th percentile, and then that gives positive, gives negative at the 54th percentile. So again, those who had this desire to give positive feedback, avoid giving negative, they're actually rated better at developing others. And then this third chart shows your overall leadership effectiveness. This is your average score on all the leadership competencies. Now, this is some tough love here. Because people that avoided giving positive, gave negative feedback, were significantly lower in their overall leadership effectiveness. What this is saying is that if you believe giving positive feedback is the best way to get people to change, I mean, we're not sure if that's right or wrong, but what we are sure of is that makes you be perceived as a much less effective leader in general. It really hurts your effectiveness. And we think that it's not as useful a way to kind of develop others and help people.
So let's be sure we've said that clearly for our listeners here today. And the message is that if you give positive and you avoid giving negative, you get a high score. If you give positive and give negative, you also get a relatively high score. But the common theme there, the common element is that this manager does give positive feedback.
Common element. And again, if you avoid giving positive, you're really hurting yourself as a leader. And we think that you're hurting your employees also. So here's our implications. The preference for giving positive feedback, giving negative feedback, the preference for giving negative feedback has a direct effect on team members. They feel judged, they feel evaluated, and leaders they feel like their leaders are only looking for what's wrong.
So let's just talk for a moment or two about why this all might be. What are the dangers of giving so-called negative or corrective feedback? The research would indicate, done by some others, not ourselves, is that in about 30% of the occasions when people give negative feedback, it ends up having a negative outcome. It makes things worse rather than better. Why is that? As probably all of our hearers know, there's been lots written on basic human needs. Many years ago, Abe Maslow created this little diagram that's become very well known and very well regarded. Kind of the pyramid of human needs. And this notion of the importance of self-actualization. There's been a book recently written by Daniel Pink that's got some very, we think, interesting research. Pink talks about basic human needs being mastery of what you do, autonomy and having freedom to kind of go about doing it, being engaged with an organization that has a real sense of purpose. And then a very recent vintage, the neuroscientists, or the brain scientists, have begun kind of trying to discern what are the fundamental human needs that are common to all of us. And let's be honest. We didn't come with a manual tied around our necks. We didn't come with any kind of instructions about how we were put together or exactly what is common to all of us. But in general, there are some things I think on which most psychologists today would agree. And we put here on the screen kind of some basic human needs that are probably common to most of us. And you see them listed there. The need for predictability. Can I see my future at all? The need for independence. Am I the captain of my own ship? Can I steer my own course? And you see the rest of them. Meaning, being included in an important group to which I belong. My status in that group. Am I high or low? Am I respected by the group I operate in? Am I being treated fairly in comparison to the people who are around me? And am I... Not only am I in or out, but am I warm or am I distant from the people that I interact with? And what is my level of engagement? Am I excited and enthused about what I'm doing and the people that I work with and the organization I work for? I would submit to you that when a manager sits down with somebody and gives him or her very corrective, kind of so-called negative feedback, that every one of those 8 factors is potentially threatened. That it's very easy for people to really become insecure and wonder if those basic human needs are going to be met in the future.
But it's interesting when you have that positive negative mix,
then it seems to go away.
You seem to kind of you validate them a bit, but then they're ready to listen to the feedback.
And I think what the positive feedback also does, Joe, is that it builds a positive relationship, which on the next slide we talk about. What are those barriers to giving corrective feedback? Well, one of them is it really presupposes a very positive relationship. And that positive relationship is only created by there being periodic episodes of reinforcing, approbation, appreciation. Sometimes another barrier is just the kind of the lack of skill. That some managers just don't know quite how to do it. Either kind. They're not good at either giving corrective feedback or the positive feedback. But what's interesting is that you can learn both of them. And we're going to just take a moment and talk about particularly some quick tips on giving positive or reinforcing feedback.
So again, let's look at this next implication. And again, the preference for giving positive feedback has a direct effect on team members feeling valued and appreciated. And then what it sets you up for is the opportunity to give corrective or negative feedback. It can also be given. And this results in higher ratings on feedback, development, and overall leadership effectiveness. And again, let's say this one more time. Those differences were statistically significant. Our sample wasn't huge there. It was 300 managers, but it was statistically significant. And I think it's meaningful differences, too, when you looked at those means.
Well, and the other message is that we know that emotions are highly contagious. And so one of the real pluses of a manager giving positive or reinforcing feedback to a subordinate is that it creates a good mood, and that mood is contagious amongst the entire team or the group of people that are involved. It really kind of resonates out and ripples out into the rest of the organization. We know that some people are suspicious of positive feedback if they feel like it's insincere, or they're being talked down to, or they're being flattered rather than really sincerely appreciated. But particularly for younger people in the organization, people who are just in the process of developing confidence in themselves and their own prowess, people who are new on a project, we think that there's real pluses in the manager taking the time to give positive feedback. And as I mentioned earlier, here on the screen we're just giving you kind of four quick tips about positive feedback. A lot of you already know, but give positive reinforcement for people's effort, their tenacity, their resourcefulness, rather than kind of talking about, oh, you're so smart, you're so gifted, you've got a high IQ, and you're uniquely creative. There's this great research by Carol Dweck, the professor at Stanford University, written up in a book called Mindset, in which she talks about kind of a growth mindset versus a fixed mentality, and that people need to be reassured that if they work hard, if they're tenacious, they're resilient, they can achieve. And that's what you want to praise. That's what you want to reinforce. And if you as you're giving people praise, if you talk about the impact that they're having on the organization and the team, and then combine that with just your own personal expression of appreciation for their hard work, it can do wonders.
This is really hard. I keep thinking about when somebody makes a big sale. We just focus all the limelight on that, rather than what's the effort that went into it. How did we prepare? What went on before that? And if you think about that, you're always going to celebrate the successes, right? So it's that part of going along the way when people are putting in the effort, when they're working real hard, and you recognize them along the way. And then, of course, we're going to recognize the wins. That's an important part of the whole process. So here's our recommendations. We found that 37% of leaders have a preference to avoid positive feedback. We don't understand that. It's easier. But if this describes you, you might want to reconsider your position. Our research says that if you're avoiding positive and focused on negative, you're going to be a less effective leader. And nobody wants to be a less effective leader. So think about those preferences. 63% have a strong preference for giving negative. I mean, you can do that, but again, our research seems to suggest you've got to mix it with the positive. So you've got to increase that preference for positive feedback. Now, you need to think about some of your beliefs, some of your assumptions, some of your attitudes. Do you have that attitude that says that giving positive is weak, fluffy? The real tough, the really good managers, they're like bring people in and tell them what's happening. I mean, as you think about your belief system, think about this. By the way, Jack, if my kids listen to this, this is going to be really bad because I'm telling you, this is easy to preach and hard to practice because we all fall into this trap. And you think about how often, I mean, we've been taught to correct. We learned it in school. We learned it at home.
In athletics.
Yeah, we asked this question of whether a good parent would give more positive feedback or a mixture. 5% said it's a mixture. The positives. So, and we'd agree with that. But if the mixture is negative, one positive, that doesn't work. And so you got to balance that out. So track the number of times you give positive feedback versus negative. Aim for a target of 2 times more positive than negative.
And by the way, no one knows what that right number is. There was some research published a few years ago that kind of proposed that it should be 4.6 to 1, and that research became discredited. And so no one knows exactly, but we know that at least 1 for 1 and probably some multiple of the negative feedback that the manager gives.
Here's my theory. If you were aiming at 2 for 1, the highest you'd ever get is 1 for 1.
Yeah.
Because like people worry, I'm never going to give negative feedback. That'll never happen. You're always going to be okay here. So another thing to do is identify leaders who are good at giving positive feedback and ask for some coaching. Build up the positive feedback. So here's some things to consider. All our studies showed that leaders who prefer giving positive feedback and avoiding giving negative feedback were rated slightly higher on giving feedback, developing others, and overall leadership effectiveness. Why is that? I mean, you think about the leaders that you go, well, people need negative, but actually, people that were just had a preference for positive and avoidance of negative, they were rated higher. Is it possible that negative or corrective feedback isn't always necessary? Is that possible?
Well, the animal trainers have certainly found out that it's not necessary. Haven't they? Training dolphins and whales. We just know that you can shape behavior by thoughtfully engaging in only positive reinforcement.
And the rats did it for me. Now, consider this. When you made your last mistake, how often was it helpful for your boss to point out the mistake? Did having your boss point out the mistake cause you to change, or would you have done it anyway? And one of the things that we found that's really helpful in giving negative feedback is you bring someone in the office and you just can't wait. You just got to get it off you, so you tell them what they did wrong. If you listen first and talk to them about it, they know. We found that the majority of times people know they made a mistake. They're not stupid about it. And if you ask them, well, what would you do to correct that in the future? They usually come up with something better than we come up with. Here's what we can do to help. We've been talking about this instrument that measures your propensity to give positive, give negative, or to avoid it. We have that survey, and it's part of a course called Elevating Feedback. We think this is a dramatic way because if you bring people in and just tell them all this research, they'll nod their head and say, yeah, give positive, yeah. But you really need the self-assessment when people look at their score and they see their tendency to prefer the one and avoid the other. Okay? And so we'd love to give you a chance to try this development course called Elevating Feedback. We will, if in the follow-up survey, you'll just put a check mark by that box that asks you for if you'd like to receive some more information on that. We'll give you a chance to do that and an opportunity to preview that material and maybe even take the assessment.
And we just mentioned this is a skill-building program. It's not about awareness. It's designed to give you a chance to practice and rehearse with other people the actual giving of feedback. And we found that with the eating comes the appetite. When you get better at something, you tend to do it more often. So we invite you to look seriously at elevating feedback.
Well, and if anybody needed to practice a skill, isn't this the skill they need to practice? Thank you so much. Appreciate having you here today. Look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Welcome to today.